Welcome back to another episode of the Pit Lane Yappers. Today we're going to talk about the Mexico Grand Prix. Obviously, the recording is a little bit different due to scheduling and different opportunities. Some people had to take a step back, so it is going to be me and Rosie for the rest of the season. But there will be episodes every race week. I'm Mox.
I'm Rosie.
Before we get into Mexico, because we couldn't film a COTA schedule because of scheduling, COTA happened. Max won the sprint.
Well done.
Like
Faster
he's
class
finally
in turn
back.
one.
He's finally back on the top step for a sprint. And then qualifying, Lando was pole. Max was gonna do a flying lap, and his lap was really good. And then George crashed. So Lando pole. And then during the race, there were some issues. But in turn one, Charles went from P4 to P1, and he kept it, which was a crazy move.
My goat. My goat.
And by the way, Ferrari is the only car that did not have the upgrades that weekend. So they were really running on hopes and dreams, and it worked.
The Catholic
Um,
Church, baby.
and then Carlos P2 and Max P3, after Lando Norris got a penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage, and a 5-second penalty. And Oscar was P5, Lando was P4.
Yeah, Oscar would have been P4, but he was asked to drop back a little bit so that Lando would remain in front of him once the penalty was applied.
Right. That is all we're going to say about COTA. Now on to Mexico. So Mexico was Alonso's 400th Grand Prix. Milestone. They said he's the only driver who has hit a 400 Grand Prix.
Obviously, the closest is Lewis Hamilton, but
Did you see what Lewis said? They're like, "What do you say about that?" And he goes, "I don't know. I'll probably be here when he leaves." Bro is holding a 17-year grudge.
Go until the end of time. Just get over it. Seriously. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
It was a whole Kimi Antonelli ago.
So FP1, we had a lot of rookies in. Speaking of Kimi Antonelli, he was in for Lewis Hamilton. Robert Schwartzman was in Zhou Guan Yu's car. Felipe Drugovich? I don't know. Drugovich is the Harry Potter. Drugovich.
Yeah,
don't know how to actually say it. Was in for Fernando Alonso. And then Ollie was in for Charles Leclerc.
Wow.
And then also, it's not a rookie, but Pato Award, who is McLaren's reserve driver, was in for Lando Norris. He was so loved by the Mexico crowd. I was so happy for him.
The notable thing in FP1 is
the most Charles Leclerc thing to ever happen to Charles Leclerc. Most likely thing.
Is car 23 and car 16 colliding when Charles wasn't even in it.
Poor Charles. But not a lot of damage happened to the Ferrari, they said. There was some damage. It was mainly like an alignment thing, which is easy to fix for the mechanics, I guess. Alex Albon, however, he really got the brunt of the damage.
The Williams looked fucked, to put it.
Oh my gosh, it looked so bad.
The wheels came off. And really what it looks like is he lost the rear, tried to gain it, and then hit Ollie, and they both spun out.
And Ollie's message for her was like, okay, are you okay? And he goes, oh, I'm sorry. And they're like, can you bring it back to the garage? And he goes, no, I really can't drive it. And he sounded so sad. And then they switched to Alex Albon, who was like, sorry guys, I don't know what happened. I have no idea what happened. And I was like, oh Lord, the two most innocent men on the grid just hit each other.
Just so sad. And then, well, Yuki was top 3 for practice.
Which was impressive to see. Because
good to see.
For VCarb, it's not been the greatest of years for their cars. But Yuki got P3. I don't even know where Lawson was. But Carlos was P2 and George was P1, baby. Which was like, I was like, finally, Mark is back with it. And then FP2, George crashed, lost control of something. They think it's the rears. Mercedes still doesn't know. He crashed, hit the wall at 35 Gs.
Mercedes never know anything.
And it was bad. He was limping. He couldn't breathe. But he was okay. But it was very scary. But FP2 was also the tire testing.
And Max had issues also.
Likely.
For tire testing, Pirelli want to bring in a soft tire.
Whatever that means. I don't understand how the tire can be softer, but
tire deck is going to go through the roof.
But basically everybody who was on those soft tires were like, yeah, there's so many issues with these tires. And I was like, oh Lord, 2025 is going to be an interesting season. But yeah, Max had brake issues, but like Pierre, I know Checo was sliding a lot. I know Oscar was really having difficulties on the soft tires. A lot of drivers who they weren't expecting to really struggled on those soft tires. So
Checo said he had brake issues as well, and then Max had a power unit issue.
Oh, poor Max. Poor Max. I'm saying poor Max as if he's not a 3-time world champion, but Carlos was P1. That was when Carlos really got comfortable. Oscar was P2 and Yuki was P3 again. So kudos to Yuki. Yuki said, I see these seat rumors are going to Liam Lawson. I was here first. Good luck.
And then FP3,
it was Rosie on Mock's crime.
McLaren Ferrari rivalry is back in the business, baby. Oscar
was fighting Carlos.
Thank God. It's like earlier season. Thank you. It's like last year.
But Carlos, I just want to defend my man. He did say sorry. He waved to Oscar and said sorry, but he said it on the radio, and obviously Oscar, they don't have proximity chats.
Good.
So Oscar, sometimes I would love proximity chats. Like, I would have loved the drama in this, like, Checo versus Lawson. I would have loved to hear what they were going to say to each other. But
certainly have an opinion on Lawson flipping Checo off at his home race, because I think if it was the other V-Club driver, if Max gets community service for swearing, fully Lawson should also get community service for swearing, even if it is in sign language.
But also in FP3, Max, that was when Max got a different power unit, and they gave him an older power unit, so they didn't have to take the grid penalty. Still didn't fix the issue. Red Bull really doesn't know what's going on at all. They need to get it together. It's stressing me out. But Ferrari also, most Ferrari thing to happen, the worker tripped.
It's just funny.
The poor guy was on national television and he tripped. He had one job, and it was to bring Charles's car out properly.
It's not even like it was a little stumble. Like, he just
he fell
full on backwards.
He fully fell backwards.
It's like Charles playing football.
Oh gosh. There's a lot of connections between Garage 16 and how clumsy they are. Meanwhile, Garage 55 was so comfortable. Carlos was flying. I don't know what possessed him this weekend, but he was like, no, I'm not letting Charles get first this time. It's me this time.
Well, still.
I feel like Checo has not had a good home race in forever.
I think, he is the reason the Grand Prix was brought back to Mexico in the first place. I think everybody deserves a nice home race.
Yeah.
But
the Haas's were flying, and I have to give credit where credit's due because that team does not have a simulator, and they're hanging on to a prayer and hope their drivers can drive their car when they bring updates. And they work. Unlike Aston Martin, who has a simulator and they still don't work. So kudos to Haas. Which, if you told me that like the best upgrades would have been the McLaren and the Haas's, I would have been like, Polar Bear in Texas. Polar Bear in Texas. What do you mean, Haas? But P1 to Oscar, P2 to Lando, and P3 to Carlos.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was.
It was a good start to quali.
No,
Weird things were happening in quali.
Don't talk to me about
like
quali.
A lot of things were happening in quali, and I don't understand it. First of all, the Astons were finally on fire. Aston Martin, whatever you did to this car, keep it like that. However, fix the brake fluid.
Notable knockout in Q1 for the first time all season. Oscar Piastri.
I feel so bad. F1 literally cursed him.
Did not make for
He was
the
the last
time
one on the grid.
To Q. It's actually painful to say didn't make Q3 for the first time.
And it wasn't even like it wasn't his fault because his first flying lap he would have been like P4, P3. But that time got deleted. So then he had to rush and he just didn't. He was scared to break the track limits again, so he didn't do his best and he got knocked out.
However, the only other driver to hit Q3 all season is the reigning world champion.
Yeah.
So take that and take off Piastri and infer for yourself.
Trust me, Mark Webber knows. Mark Webber is aware. But Checo was also out.
Again, feel bad.
He was P18. He was only above Ocon and Zhou Guanyu. Franco was also out. I think for the first time since he's been in the car, he was out when Alex stayed in.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure.
Which hopefully ease these conversations.
These rumors that aren't even rumors. I don't even know where they're coming from because Williams is like, I don't know. No.
Williams should fire Alex Albon. What?
The team revolves around him, bro. But
over.
Q2. Yuki Tsunoda, do I have words for you?
The way I don't remember anything after Q1.
Oh, trust me, I'll take over. Alonso, well, Aston Martin does this thing called a mid-lap. So when everybody else isn't on the track, they have their drivers out and they go, you know what, you're gonna get one flying lap in, and that's gonna be your time.
You mean the strategy that hasn't worked all season?
Yeah, for the 20 races, yeah, that one. The only other drivers that were on the laps were like Haas's, V-Carbs, and I think maybe one McLaren. He was on a flying lap. He was getting purples. He was beating Max. And I was like, oh, we are so back. We are so back. Yuki crashed. And red flagged the entire session. And nobody else could get a time, and Alonso had no time. So he ended up P13.
That's cool.
Lance Stroll wasn't even out. He didn't even set a time.
And then Q3.
But I will say Yuki's crash was bad. It was like George's. It was bad. It was obviously less G-force, but it was a big crash. So kudos to V-Carb. Anyways, that meant both V-Carbs were out. So Lawson and Yuki. Stroll and Alonso. And Valtteri Bottas. I'm not shocked about Stake. I still, to this day, still don't understand if Stake has ever brought upgrades.
Doing? I don't understand. I think I could walk the track faster.
Steak, if you're hiring, I'm a very good fast walker.
Like
I'd definitely be faster than the
genuinely,
cars.
their entire budget has gone into
Social
their
media.
social media.
Which, like, thank you. Their social media is so funny, but at the same time, poor Botas. He went from Mercedes, the silver arrows, to a highlighter color.
Like it's all good having funny TikToks, but bro, you've got a car to build.
Also, while we were waiting for Q1 to start because they had to clear up the debris, they interviewed Alonso, and Alonso was like, yeah, really disappointing. I was disappointed. I was finally comfortable with the settings. I finally felt good in the car. 20 races in, he finally felt comfortable with the car, and he couldn't use it. I literally wanted to cry. He looked so...
Brazil is this weekend.
What?
Brazil is soon.
Yeah, I know. Fernando Alonso, P1, let's go. Wow, I'm so excited for F1 to be back. I can't wait to celebrate Fernando Alonso's 400th Grand Prix with a podium.
No, do you know what happened in Brazil 2 years ago?
Yep, George.
George.
But anyways, Q1. I need to talk about...
Q3, you mean? Q3.
No. Maybe?
Yes.
I'm really bad at the numbers. Anyways, the last qualifying round. Carlos Sainz, you are amazing. He set 2 laps. And they both were the fastest lap. And it's so rewarding because he's like, I feel like we finally have a chance with Ferrari to win the constructors, and I won't be here next year to see it happen. Pole position, and it was his first pole of the season. That's all I have. Also, I have Mercs were flying.
They were quite fast.
Yeah.
To be honest.
But the last lap, like with the, I don't know, maybe 50 seconds to go, they were setting yellows. And I was like, what happened to this fast Mercedes? Like, when it counts, Mercedes can't bring it.
Like, it's clearly the car as well with Mercedes, because you have Lewis in the car who has driven a Mercedes for 11 years.
It's just so frustrating. Like, I couldn't imagine being Lewis or George. And also, everyone's like, it's always like there's Lewis fans who are like, oh, Mercedes is sabotaging Lewis's car for George. But George is just as unlucky.
That's how you know they're not paying attention to George's races either, because George will be like, please help me, and Mercedes are like, okay, no.
My favorite note is when George was like, I have oversteer and understeer, and Mercedes goes, I don't see anything on this side. Like, what happened to listen? He's telling you he has it. Listen to your driver and try to figure it out. Like, something I will say about Red Bull is Red Bull with Max, who they know is their first driver, will be their first driver until he leaves. He will say, I have steering issues, and GP will say, we're working on it. Even if they're like, we see nothing, we're working on it. Like, Mercedes could never. Even with Lewis, who was their first driver for so long, they'd be like, yeah, we don't see anything. Like, last year when Lewis was like, this car is so bad to drive, Toto was like, yeah, I know this car is bad, just drive.
What do you mean?
Like, but P1 Carlos, P2 Max. It was a good week to be me.
I was in P4 again.
I will say though, P3 was the place to be, which was Lando. That is the position you wanted to be. However, like, according to statistics, but in recent years, everyone's like, P4 is actually where you want to be because P1 and P2 will always hit each other, and P3 is so close they'll hit each other and they'll be caught up in damage, and P4 will just fly right through. And I was like, all right, it's a good weekend to beat Charles Leclerc.
We know he can do that.
We saw it last week. But I was so scared because they're like, this is one of the tracks where you really don't want to be P1. Like, converting pole position to a win is near impossible on this track. No, near impossible. Not for Carlos Sainz.
Well, there was a lot of fighting this race, a lot of overtakes, a lot of radios.
We need to start at the starting line.
Yeah.
Before the race, well, actually it was after the race started, but like during the red lights, Checo had a false start. It wasn't even just a false start. He was quite literally, the line was here. He was like this far over the line.
Yeah, it was like way over the line. But to be fair to him, he did jump most of the drivers of his own accord rather than because.
But I was watching the places and it said PER and it went up +5 and I was like, wait a minute. He just had the best start of his life. What is happening?
Yeah, literally.
And then I was like, oh, false start. That's okay. Because he was ahead of whoever was next to him. I think it was
Oscar.
Yeah, it was Oscar. I was like, okay. But like the other people in front of Oscar, he overtook. Oscar was like the only one that he really had that advantage. But when his radio
No, it was
Red Bull going high, they're looking at a false start. It's like, nope, great start. No. I was like, I would love to be this confident.
He was like, excuse me? I don't think so. Not in my house.
But Max had an amazing start.
Yes, he did.
Max is always really good with starts, but I was like, Carlos really usually matches Max's speed. It's just they're never usually next to each other. I don't know what it was. This week, Carlos's reaction was slow. But he went off. He was driven off by, I don't even remember who it was. I think it was actually Charles right behind him. And he's like, okay, I need to get over because Charles will hit me. And I'd rather Charles in front than both Ferraris out.
Yeah.
And he gained a position, but he gave the position right back. Like literally Ferrari didn't even have to tell him. And while that was going on, Yuki, I don't even know what Yuki was going on.
So Yuki was trying to come up because it was a Yuki, Albon, and Gasly. And Gasly was squeezing Albon on the inside because he couldn't see Yuki, obviously. And Yuki was trying to go around the outside of Alex when there was no space. Like, actually no space at all.
I just don't understand because if you watch his onboard, like, he obviously would have had to give that position back because he was already off the track. Like, his entire car was off the track. So, which I don't know, I don't remember who was commentating this weekend, but they were like, it's not Pierre's fault. It's not Alex's fault. Pierre had no idea he'd have such a rash driver going into him.
You can't possibly know, can you? And then
like everyone's like, oh, Alex ruined Yuki's race. And I'm like, Alex was ahead and a car just went flying by him.
Yeah.
Like he was completely not at fault.
So yeah, that's Yuki and Alex done for the rest of the race. I'm sure the Williams and V-Carb mechanics were very, very happy with the amount of work they've done this weekend.
Can I just say, Red Bull, and I mean, when I say Red Bull, I mean Red Bull and V-Carb, had the worst race of their lives this year. This race in Mexico. Like, they're like, not even gonna comment on it. Mexico didn't happen. Like literally Max Verstappen 2 hours after the race was in Brazil. It was like, no, not staying. Goodbye. But I think it was lap maybe 4 or 5 because there was a safety car for a while. When we restart, Carlos's overtake on Max
was good.
I screamed. He made it look so easy, which everyone's like, oh, he caught Max off guard. And I was like, no, Max definitely had a power unit issue, but Carlos
Can we talk?
We're not there yet.
Can we talk about my worst enemy? Charles Radio.
Well, we'll get there because that didn't happen for a while. because
the
Max was still in front of Charles for a while, and then Charles overtook Max, which was once again easy. I don't know what Ferrari is doing, but keep it up because their cars are fast. And then the radios started. I think it was Fred on Friday said that if right after pole or Saturday, I don't remember. He's like, of course.
I wasn't talking about that radio. I was talking about the fact that, okay, for reference, guys, Charles spent the whole race getting water all down his throat, basically, because his drink wasn't secured properly. He had no choice.
He literally started leaking all over the car.
Yeah.
So he wasn't just like, he wasn't drinking. He just was covered in water.
Like, it was all over his balaclava and everything. So bro was not having a good time.
Charles, oh, the poor man. Things happen to Charles that like are unbelievable. There's like, you're like, there's no way that's actually happening to him, but like they do. It's kind of like me. Like things happen to me and I'm like, don't know how this happened, but it happened to me. But when Carlos was in the front, it was Ferrari 1-2 for the longest time. And they were very close for a long stint. And Carlos came on the radio and was like, come on, we don't want to do this. Meanwhile, the day before, Fred Vasseur said that if it was between Charles and Carlos, they would prioritize Charles because he's very close to Lando and he can overtake Lando in the standings. But only they didn't include this on Twitter when they were talking about it because everybody just hates Fred. But he said only if it's safe, which means if somebody's directly behind Charles, they're not going to do it because they're going to lose the 1-2 and it's going to ruin the constructors. So there was a point where Lando was like 6 or 7 seconds behind Charles and Carlos. And Carlos came on the radio and said, come on, guys, we're not fighting. We don't want to do this. Don't let him fight. And they went on to Charles's radio and said,
lift and coast.
Lift and coast. We're degrading very quickly, which was a lie. But I would be so mad if I was Charles and I found that out after the race. But I also think that if they told Charles we're prioritizing your race, and then they were like, okay, well, Carlos is not going to let Charles by. We can say team orders, and he's going to say no. Like, there's really nothing for Carlos to do other than say, this is a 1-2. You're going to get the max, you're going to get the max points anyways.
But yeah, telling Charles that his temps were too high and to lift and coast, and he was like, I am lifting and coasting, and Brian was like, you need to do it more because and
then they finally, I think Charles finally figured out that they were kind of not telling the truth. He's like, come on guys, we need to do something with Carlos. Lando was too close to Charles and Carlos was too far away from Charles, that if Carlos slowed down to catch up with Charles, the slipstream would have helped Lando and it would have been Charles P1, Lando P2, Carlos P3, or Charles P1 and Carlos and Lando DNFing. Yeah. So unfortunately, but they did get a lot of points for the constructors, which is what Carlos wanted. Obviously, Carlos is not driving for Charles. They're not teammates at the end of the season. He has nothing keeping him to Ferrari.
No, obviously, it's just more the gaslighting from Garage 16 to Charles. Well, bro is already covered in water.
He was having the worst phase of his life.
But in water.
Speaking of arguments,
your car crashed in FP1, and your team are lying to you.
Speaking of arguments and fighting on track, Max and Lando fought again right after Coda and after Lando got the penalty. Max basically did the same exact thing he did in Austin, just a lot more aggressively. It was kind of like, was it Austria?
Yeah.
Or Belgium? Whenever
Austria.
George won. Basically, which, I mean, the commentators were like, yeah, he needs a penalty, which the second one, 100%, Max was so behind, and he just went, okay, I'm going to drive into Lando now. And I was like, okay, need to keep my car intact. Which was the first one was, I was like, I cannot tell from these angles. I'm going to let the stewards do their job. I don't know. But the second one was definitely Max was just trying to take Lando out. But
20 seconds is a long time.
Max got 10 seconds for the first one, and then 10 seconds for the second, so it was 20 seconds. But Max's radios. They're like, all right, Max, we got a 10-second. It's like, okay, Max, we got a 10-second penalty. Okay, Max, we got another 10-second penalty. And he goes, wow, 20 seconds.
That's so silly.
He's so done.
Let that man say fuck.
Let that man curse.
They said they radioed George as well to tell him about the max 20 seconds, even though
Which
George...
I find it really funny that Merc thought they were fighting Max. They were fighting each other the entire race.
And George was like, wow. But like...
Just like Coda when they were like, okay, we got this. And he goes, what?
Yeah, exactly.
I love George. I love him so much. But speaking of the Mercs and George and Lewis were fighting for a long time, and then they had, I don't remember if it was Lewis or George who pit first, but they had them pit because they were like not having a Mercedes moment, not happening. And then they ended up next to each other again.
They just like each other.
And they fought. They really were like, okay, we'll let him drive. And so many people are like, oh, George can't keep up with Lewis. Lewis is a 7-time world champion. Like, George, there's no way George is keeping up. George kept Lewis Hamilton behind him for like 30 laps.
It's obvious that George couldn't keep up with Lewis. Mercedes would have been off ages ago.
Also, George had the Miami specs.
Yeah.
Because his car was so broken, they had to go back to the Miami specs. And he kept Lewis Hamilton behind him for 30 laps.
Miami was 15 races ago.
Miami was insane. Oh, I remember when I thought Miami was going to be a good race for the Marks. Okay, we're gonna have to talk about this. I don't want to talk about it, but I'm gonna have to.
Right.
Guys, we were so happy about the 400th Grand Prix. So happy. They were saying Alonso's going to the pits. They didn't put a radio, and I was like, okay, this is gonna go bad. They showed the overhead shot. He overshot his pit stop. Oh my gosh, it was like literally like 3/4 of his car was out of that box. And then they were like, retire the car.
And
they didn't say why at all. But it was a suspension brake issue. Aston Martin, can we just pretend Brazil is his 400th Grand Prix? I'm going to. But this is where my fun fact comes in. It's not so fun for me. But it is weird. Fernando Alonso has now retired on his 200th, 300th, and 400th race. All with 3 different teams. The first one was Ferrari, the second was McLaren, and the third is Aston Martin.
Bro has had enough.
And they all were like car issues. Like, he didn't crash. Ferrari, I think he got a puncture from the crash in front of him. McLaren, it was some engine issue. And Aston Martin was the brakes. Next time for his 500th, Fernando Alonso, skip it. Skip the weekend. I can't do it anymore.
500?
Yes, he'll be here until he wins a championship again. He said he's not leaving. But that's it really for anything besides the fighting.
So many overtakes. Oh, wait. We heard Oscar Piastri swear on the radio.
Why didn't he get fined or community service?
because it was cunty and it was the first time he's done it.
FIA bull who? If that was Max, they would have been like, yeah, so you're next for Brazil. I want you to start in Silverstone.
Yeah. Well, just for people who don't follow Oscar like I do, Oscar swearing on the radio is the equivalent of like a Cat 5 hurricane. So that is like a level 5 temper tantrum from here. And all he said was, think about pulling me out of this shit, because he was fighting with Lawson.
It's kind of crazy because like for as long as I think for as long as I've watched Oscar, I don't think he's like last year or this year he's sworn yet.
No. Although I would like to say, because I've not really touched on it yet, my goat did start in P17. He did finish. He finished in P8,
which is crazy. But Mexico is kind of the place to overtake. Like, I would be shocked if Oscar, with who was in front of him, didn't overtake who he did.
Yeah.
But like the overtakes he was doing the outsides. He was overtaking in places where they were like, yeah, you're not supposed to overtake there. And he was like, anyways, I'm going to overtake there. Like, it was quite impressive. But like, people are like, yeah, well, obviously he was going to pass the Haas. And I was like, not obviously. The Haas is like the second fastest car. But
Oscar's very good at overtaking in places and that he shouldn't be. For example, Baku, his overtake on Charles was supposed to be mathematically impossible.
I will never forget the commentary where it was like, Oscar's not going to overtake Charles here. Like, there's no way he's going to be able to overtake Leclerc. And they go, he's going for it. He did it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was like, I know Fernando Alonso's protege when I see it.
It's on Charles being like, how are you going to let him overtake you? It wasn't supposed to be possible.
Charles was probably like, what the heck is this child doing? But speaking of overtakes, this is when we get into all the penalties besides Max's, because we've already talked about Max. But Checo versus Lawson, which was, I'm so sorry, the fact that Checo was fighting Liam Lawson out of everybody else he could have been fighting on was just really funny, because that's the person rumored to take his seat. But Lawson put a hole in Checo's car.
Yes, it was quite a big hole.
Which, by the way, no commentators mentioned it until he was in the pit, and they would go, wow, that's a big hole. Anyway, he's going back out on medium tires, and I was like, rewind, there's a hole in his car.
It's his home race. And then there's a hole in his car.
And then he got investigated.
You were out in Q1.
He got investigated because he forced Stroll off the road, which he did, by the way. But the FIA said, the stewards were like, yeah, well, Checo's car was literally broken. That was not his fault, so he didn't get a penalty. But he got ahead of Lawson like 3 times, and then Lawson overtook him, and then he went back, and then it was back and forth, and then it finally stuck for a while, and then Lawson overtook him and flipped him off.
Which, by the way, gross behavior.
After Lawson was like, what the F is this guy doing? He's insane. And then Checo was like, this guy's dangerous. Like, there's a lot of problems between them. Like, they were obviously not happy with, either of them were not happy. Liam did apologize. He said it was the heat of the moment. Still think it was pretty bad. I don't understand how that's allowed and swearing isn't, but I'm not the FIA.
Well, also, like, it's Checo's home race, and so he's been at this job a lot longer than you have.
I'd just like everyone to know that if anybody else did that, like, if that was Lawson to Charles in Monaco, or if that was Lawson to either Oscar or Lando or somebody, like, he would be destroyed. It's because it's Checo that everyone's like, okay, anyways, like, I don't care.
People think it's funny to shit on Checo when really, like, you don't have to like the guy, but you show like basic respect.
Yeah, it's just so sad. But speaking of Lawson, while that was going on, Franco Colapinto was also behind him, and he's like, how do I get out of this? I went to his onboard because I was like, I know this man's got tea on his board. And I tuned in, and he was like, what am I supposed to do? I was like, oh God, we got a guy who doesn't know what to do. But Franco got a 10-second penalty for causing a collision with Lawson, who then went into Checo. So it was Franco's fault that Lawson put a hole in Checo's car. It just happened to be Red Bull on Red Bull crime. But Lawson and Checo started nowhere near each other, right? Let me go back. Lawson was P12 and Checo was P18.
Yeah.
And they ended up I think P16 and 17, dead last, the last two.
Checo said, you're coming down with me, I think it's fuck. And
Yuki went, thank you, Christian Horner, can I have that seat? And Christian Horner went, so Franco Colapinto, are you free?
Yeah. Hey, Franco.
Like, poor
Yuki, man.
Poor Yuki. I will say, if Franco gets the Red Bull seat, I would laugh because they have two other drivers, and they were like, yeah, we know this is our junior driver. This is our junior team. This just proves it's not the junior team, it's just another team.
I would love for Franco to get the Red Bull seat, actually.
I don't. Actually, it would be funny because, like, it would obviously show that Red Bull has just two teams and it's not like a junior team and whatever. But at the same time, I've seen the curse of the Red Bull second driver.
Well, yeah, that's true, but I just like Franco, so.
Yeah, I do want Franco. I think he should get the Sauber seat. If anyone. But then at the end of the race, Carlos Sainz won Mexico. And his radio, his voice break, I cried. I would like everybody to know I cried like hard.
Because not even like a little bit.
Nope. Sobbed.
It was like
straight. Because I feel like this was the race. Like, Australia was good, but it was like the second race. So I was like, I still have so much time with Carlos in a Ferrari. And then it was like Charles win. And I was like, can we get closer to Abu Dhabi? And Carlos has yet to win again in Ferrari. And this is going to be the last time he's on a podium for a while. I didn't even care if he was P2 or P3. I was like, I do want a race win, but like after that, it's fine. He can be P2 for the rest of the season. Like, prioritize Charles. I get it. I just want him to win one last time. And then his radio, he was like, oh, thank you. And his voice broke. I will say, though, the F1 commentators really need a history book.
Yeah, I was about to say that too. I was like, because they called him the massive Mexican. I was like, ooh, we're not calling Spanish man that. Ooh.
Also, they gave him a Spanish flag. Did you see that? Ferrari gave a Spanish flag, and he like shoved it into his Ferrari seat. He was like, no.
He was like, are you insane?
I think Carlos knew the issue.
Yeah. Well, Mexico are currently trying to get the Spanish government to apologize for the genocide of Mexicans.
But Carlos's win, with Charles' fastest lap, even though he did go off the track. Which I would just like to say, there's a Charles Leclerc fan on the internet who's like, this is Carlos's fault that Charles went off. Like, he couldn't help his teammate. I was like, dude is 8 seconds ahead of his teammate. What? How did he cause Charles to go off?
Yeah, I would like to say everyone and their mother appeared for fastest lap. Lawson did,
literally
Checo
everyone
did, Charles did.
Which, can I just say, Checo pitting for fastest lap with a hole in his car? Bro, Red Bull was really praying.
Get it? Like, he has a huge hole in his car.
I don't understand why they didn't just DNF him. Like, I understand he wants to race in Mexico, but like, let him keep some dignity. He started P18, and I guess he did move up, but that's because we had 3 DNFs. Like, he moved nowhere. He moved down. He was dead last. Sorry, Checo, but like, but can I also say, if Fernando Alonso couldn't win Mexico, I'm glad it was Carlos.
Yeah.
I meant it's Fernando's 400th, and I wanted Fernando to do well, but I'm glad if Fernando didn't do well, Carlos did, because those are my drivers. Those are my two drivers, and that is father and son. Also, it was the first time Carlos's mom was there.
Also,
So you better go to every single rest of the race. I'm telling you right now, Mrs. Sainz.
what we should actually talk about now is the live leaderboard is Ferrari have now overtaken Red Bull in the constructors. So the way
I'm gonna be completely honest. I understand constructors. It's like everyone's like, oh, it's so important. We need to win the constructors. I'm over here just praying for drivers. I don't really care about constructors because it's all about advertisement and money and sponsors. Like, I don't care.
I think there should be a rule, not for any reason other than my own personal aesthetics and reasoning. I think the rule is that you can only get sponsors that match your team colours.
No more HP.
Exactly. Get that ugly fuck-ass blue out my red suit.
I actually really like the blue. Like, I like that shade of blue. It just doesn't go well on the Ferrari, like,
It
suit.
should be a Williams sponsor, if anything.
I don't know. I don't think we know if any cars are bringing upgrades, but there shouldn't be that many big upgrades because there's only, 5 races left? And it's the end of the triple header. And then, are we in Vegas or Qatar first? I think it's Vegas, right?
I think it's
when we
Vegas.
come back. And then Qatar and Abu Dhabi. That would make sense. But yeah, it's Vegas, Qatar, Abu Dhabi. Which Abu Dhabi ends the same day that the Eras Tour ends. It's gonna be bad for us.
What am I supposed to do with my life?
I don't know. But anyways, yeah, Brazil. I'm really hoping Fernando Alonso does better. Because we all remember last year when it was to the line between Checo and Fernando. And Fernando got on a podium.
That was some good racing.
That was I felt like for the first time since Singapore last year, I was like, that is real racing. Like, racing is back.
Yeah. And like it was good racing from both of them as well. Not just Alonso.
I honestly think that was the race that Red Bull went, okay, Checo's still got it.
Let's resign him. We can keep him.
Yeah. And then it never happened again.
Once a year it is like, so don't worry about it, guys. I'm all for moving in silence, but as of right now, this statistic still stands and it might not next week. Oscar Piastri is still the only driver on the grid to complete 100% of racing laps.
I would just like everyone to know that before this week, Alonso also did it. He just happened to be lapped. So it doesn't count. Which is really frustrating because he did complete all the laps. No, he didn't. So even if it was the stat he had, he lost it. But
yeah, let's hope and pray that stat remains for the rest of the season. But if the F1 count brings it up,
he's only got 4 races left.
Yeah, but
I'm scared of Vegas because we all know what happened last year in Vegas for Lando, and it could very well happen to anyone in the top right now.
If the official F1 account tweets these statistics, I might kill them. We are trying to move in silence. And the Q3 thing, they also tweeted.
They did tweet and it cursed them.
Anyways, yeah, that's Mexico. See you next week for Brazil.
Bye.
Bye.